Let's talk about the perfect steak. I don't think it's hard to do, but it just requires a little bit of thought. It's not rocket surgery, as the footballers would say, but there's a couple of tips that I can give you that I think will help you cook the best steak you possibly can at home. Before we go anywhere near the barbecue, just think for a second about the steak that you want to eat. If you like well done meat, I reckon the perfect well done steak needs to be cut quite thinly. It'll caramelise on the outside and cook all the way through. If you like meat really rare or almost blue, a great big piece of steak like this one nearer me, it will caramelise on the outside but still be very, very rare in the middle. This is a steak for somebody who likes their meat rare or blue. If you try and cook this well done, the meat will probably burn by the time it's set all the way through. For me, to have a perfect medium rare steak, you want a steak about 2 centimetres thick. With this, you'll caramelise the outside and get all that lovely flavour, but the middle of the meat will still be beautifully pink. The other important thing is always to get your steak out of the fridge, I think about a half an hour before you're going to cook it. Don't leave it in the blazing sun. Leave it somewhere cool, but let it come back to room temperature before you put it anywhere near the barbecue. The reason for this is simple. If it's cold out of the fridge, the outside will cook and the inside will still be cold and the meat won't cook through evenly. I'm just going to cook the middle steak, the one that I think will cook perfectly medium rare. I'm going to brush it with a little bit of olive oil. Some olive oil on both sides. If you brush the steak with oil rather than pouring oil all over your barbecue, you finish up without the flavour of burnt oil there. And a little bit of black pepper, and finally some sea salt, not too much, because we're going to put some more on later to really enhances the flavour. Then, on the barbie, you love that sizzle. You need to make sure that your barbecue plate, whether it's the flat grill or the char grill, is nice and hot before you put the steak down. If you don't, the steak will stick to it. It's that simple. You know the steak's ready to turn when it's cooked about a third of the way through and you start to see little bubbles of moisture on top of the meat. The most important thing about cooking a steak is that you turn it once, not 20 times, not 40 times, not 100 times. Just because you're holding the tongs doesn't mean that you have to stand there and turn the steak constantly while it's cooking. All it means is that the meat won't caramelise properly on the outside and it just toughens it up. So be strong. Turn it once and sit there and watch it. It's a thing of beauty. While the steak's cooking, I want to show you how to make a really easy herb butter that's fantastic over any sort of barbecued meat. I've got some butter here that I've cut into cubes and I've allowed to go soft. I've got some chives, some flat leaf parsley, some basil and some oregano or oregano depending on where you grew up. I'm going to take the chives and chop them reasonably finely. The rest of the herbs, I'm just going to chop these fairly roughly because they're going to go into a food processor. But if you want to be really lazy like I normally am, you can just do this in a bowl with the back of a fork if the butter's soft enough. It just means you've got to chop the herbs a lot more finely. This can go to the food processor with the butter. And we're going to put in just a tiny dollop of tomato paste, not much at all. Just half a teaspoon of fish sauce or nampla, and the zest of about half a lemon. Some salt, some black pepper, that only needs a moment to finely chop all the herbs and mix everything through completely. All we need is a sheet of baking paper, or greaseproof paper as they used to call it in the old days, or some foil, down flat. So we spoon the butter out of the food processor into a lump in the middle. And then it's just a matter of rolling it up and shaping it with your hands to make a sausage shape. I think you want it about the same size, as around as a 50-cent piece, something like that. And then when you've got it into that sort of sausage shape, just twist the end so you're making almost like a bonbon out of it, and that presses it all in, gives it a lovely firm shape, and that's it. Just into the fridge, let it firm up again, and then you can cut it into slices and put it over your steak or whatever else you want to cook on the barbecue, and you can freeze what you don't use. That looks good enough to eat. You beauty. Always put your cooked meat on a clean plate. Don't put your steak back on the plate that it came to the barbecue on. And now we're going to rest it. It's going to cover it loosely with foil, or a clean tea towel's fine as well. Don't crimp it down really tightly. If you do, the chances are that the steak will keep cooking from the steam that comes out of the hot meat. So just loosely cover it with foil for 4 or 5 minutes. The bigger the piece of steak, or the bigger the piece of meat, whatever you cook on the barbecue, the longer it needs to rest. A little tiny piece of steak that thick will only need a moment. People often ask me how to tell if a steak's cooked. Well, experience is one thing. If you cook a million of them, you get a feel for it. But another way is just to give it a poke with your finger and compare it to this muscle here under your thumb. And if you squeeze your thumb against your pinky and push hard, that muscle there will be very tight, and that's comparable to feeling a well-done piece of steak. If you put it against the next finger, it's more like a medium well-done steak. Against your middle finger is more like a medium rare steak. And against your first finger there, if you push, it's still quite soft and fleshy, and it's more like a rare steak. That's a pretty good way of telling how well your steak's cooked without having to cut into it. So all we do now is a steak on a plate and a couple of slices of this fabulous herb butter to melt on top. Yummo, the perfect steak.